After several years in the community here, I want to write a little bit about the tech startup scene here in Taiwan. There's been a lot of ink spilled on the exciting, vibrant tech ecosystem in Shenzhen or Beijing. And that's fine. There are companies in those areas worth writing about. But no one's been writing about Taiwan's tech industry, so I figured I'd do a background. The short summary is, Taiwan's tech startup community lags behind its rivals on the mainland. This is for several reasons. But things are coming around, and I am optimistic about its near future. So let's do some background. Taiwan is considered an Asian tiger. It's a technology hotspot, but much of that is centered on hardware. This is due to Taiwan's economic history, which has been centered on agriculture, manufacturing, industry, and electronics hardware. After mainland China opened its doors to the outside world, Taiwanese businessmen, with their shared heritage and language, were amongst the first to bridge the gap between cheap Chinese labor and rich American buyers. Taiwanese supplied the capital to set up factories on the Chinese mainland and reap the gains. You can learn a bit more about this history in my video about Foxconn. After a few years, Taiwanese companies went up the value chain and started cranking out hardware under their own brands. Thus emerged Taiwan's large hardware makers like Asus, Acer, and MSI. These companies are recognized brands globally in the electronics hardware space. And shows like Computex reinforced Taiwan's importance in the hardware manufacturing chain. And then Apple unveiled the iPhone and sparked the mobile boom. Taiwan regrettably missed out on its own native brand. HTC's failure is quite sad, but caught some of the upside anyway. Many essential mobile component suppliers, like MediaTek and the like, are based in Taiwan. Your phones would not be as powerful or cheap were it not for Taiwan's hardware prowess. This double-barrel development has made many families immensely rich. Taipei has the 8th most super-rich families, defined as having over 30 million in assets in the world. They are not as ostentatious with their wealth as the second-generation magnates on the mainland are, but you cannot deny the Teslas, Maseratis, and Lambos puttering around in Taipei's rich Neihu and Tianmu districts. This may sound like a fantastic thing for Taiwan, right? Rich people mean investors with money to burn, right? But Taiwanese capital holders do not have an incentive to invest into Taiwan itself. Why bother investing into a tiny startup when you can invest it into another factory on the mainland or buy expensive Taipei property? Not to mention that very few of these families made their money selling software. They don't understand Silicon Valley type software businesses and internet startups, and thus often decline to invest in it. So many small startup founders find that even though there's a lot of money sloshing around, they can't get acceptable funding for their projects or their small companies. Banks won't fund them, and there are no seed funds. So what do? They leave. So let's talk a bit about brain drain. First thing I want to say is that the vast majority of Taiwanese stay in Taiwan. There's so much design and programming talent here, and almost every country in the world suffers from the problem of losing its top talent. With that being said, brain drain is a major problem for Taiwan Island. When you have a lot of young Taiwanese who feel that they cannot afford a life of their own or have the opportunity to take risks, they leave. China's economy is so large, its market so massive, and the shared cultural ties so close that you cannot ignore its effect on Taiwan's educated people. Many of Taiwan's young population go to the mainland to work. Some say almost 9% of the entire youth population resides there. But a good portion also go to the United States as well, taking advantage of Taiwan's good relations with the Stars and Stripes. Another good portion of Taiwanese also go to the UK for education, but the UK's restrictive immigration policies almost inevitably force them to return. Regardless of where they may go, the point is that many of Taiwan's youth may want to leave Taiwan itself, and the reasons they do so are myriad. These are major trends, and they continue to affect Taiwan's economy, but no trend lasts forever, and some of these economic forces have started to reverse. For example, the recent wave of reshoring from large manufacturers diversifying their supply chains away from China, or the tightening of immigration laws around the world, or Taiwan's success in containing the pandemic. But let's talk a little bit about national policies. Government policies can encourage the development of a domestic, export-oriented tech startup economy, and that's crucial. Like I said, there's so much talent here. For the most part, the government has played a rather hands-off role in the software and startups market. They've held an event or two, they've subsidized and provided a few co-working type locations for startups to hold up in. They've invited a few seed startup funds, but that's about it. It's basically beginner stuff. Something the government has been mostly focusing on is encouraging American and European tech companies to set up major tech offices here. Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have held large events here looking to sell their wares into the Taiwan market. And while I think it's great that these companies value the Taiwan market, I do think policy should try to encourage the growth of native Taiwanese companies, rather than having the whole market basically colonized by the US and Europe. I don't necessarily think that the Taiwanese government should subsidize private companies under the table until they dominate their market, like how China does with Huawei. Growing a giant internet software sector might not even be the right thing for Taiwan, considering how saturated the global market already is. But at the very least, I think the government can take steps to make it easier for entrepreneurs to get the funding, education, market opportunities that they need to expand. Tech incubators such as Y Combinator and Techstars contributed greatly to the Silicon Valley tech community. However, it's not as easy to find these types of companies in Taiwan. There are a few country-oriented ones, but they are mostly under the radar. Probably the most prominent such Taiwanese incubator is AppWorks. It's the most prominent, yes, but still quite small. And I do wonder if there are still concerns about the riskiness of the startup life, and maybe that's why people don't join these incubators. People go to Y Combinator because of the name, and they believe the course bestows real value. I think there's one mindset shift that Taiwanese tech entrepreneurs need to adopt as they grow their internet and software businesses, and that is tied to the fact that they need to create and design their products for the global market. I recently visited Israel, which is a global tech story. A lot of tech successes have come out of this tiny country, including Viber and Fiber. Because their domestic market of some 9 million people will never be big enough for a large tech startup business, they know from the very beginning that their products have to go global. And that's, I think, a story that Taiwan can learn from. There are a few differences. Taiwan's domestic market is larger than Israel's, and in many cases, it's big enough for a thriving and small and medium business. Taiwanese people can't speak English well enough sometimes, and a lot of Taiwanese people are somewhat low-key. But I think some of that is changing as a new generation comes to bat in this new economy. So that's it for now, just a small startup background video, a roundup of the industry. But in the future, I want to feature a few names that I have been noticing within Taiwan's developing tech startup community. Until then, see you guys later. Bye-bye.